Welcome to the May Patch Tuesday webinar. Jumping into today's content then. We're going to go through a overview of Patch Tuesday. We're going to talk a little bit about some recent news that's going on, and then Todd is going to walk us through the bulletins and releases, and then we'll wrap up with what we call the Between the Patch Tuesdays. Many vendors that we have to deal with are in more of a continuous release mode, meaning Patch Tuesday is not when they release their patches. So that means between Patch Tuesdays, a whole lot of things come out that you may or may not be fully aware of. So we try to give you a recap of the security-related items that have been releasing over the past month here, so you get a better idea of what some of the other things are that you may want to be aware of. All right. Yesterday, we did have releases from Adobe and from Microsoft. Google Chrome. Todd, Google Chrome did release just later in the day, right? Or did they not release?
No, they did not. I did not see it.
Okay. So just be aware, Chrome releases weekly. We typically expect that to be on Patch Tuesday, on the Patch Tuesday week. Occasionally, it comes out a day or so later. So be expecting that here in the next day or two for sure. We'll probably see another Chrome update come out within the next 24 hours. They did their last release last Tuesday. So I was actually expecting it to be early in the week, but it might be today or tomorrow, depending on what they all have coming in there.
Yeah, Chris, it's not still on their downloads page yet. Just Chrome OS released yesterday, but not the actual browser. So,
got it. Okay. So we'll keep an eye out for that. Getting into some of the news, I've got a few articles that I'm going to kick off here with and talk through a couple of things. So here's where I'm going to stop sharing slides and I'm going to switch over to sharing my browser for a little bit. And we're going to go through a couple of things there. So grab the presentation though. As we're going through this, I am going to be working through more of those slides. So from that in the news section, we're going to go through these news articles. We're going to go through the known exploited and the disclosures, and we're going to talk about a couple of other things before I switch back over to slides. So the first article here is Dark Reading did a pretty good overview of several of the updates that came out yesterday, including the zero-day vulnerabilities. Couple of things that I think were worth noting in here. One of the vulnerabilities, the one that probably is easiest to have mitigated. This is one where I wanted to call this one out because it's something that if you haven't taken steps to do this already, there are ways for an attacker to exploit this, even if you're not typically using this mode. So some of you may be familiar that you can actually run the Edge browser in Internet Explorer mode. This is meant for backward compatibility in environments where you've got an application that requires Internet Explorer still, and you haven't gotten that application up to a more modern kind of experience. Typically, this is going to be in a specific case where you've got that application for a small group of users who should have access to using that type of mode. Anywhere else in your environment, you should be trying to disable this type of capability. Even if you're not configured for that, there have been attempts by threat actors to force Edge into IE mode to exploit vulnerabilities here. And I would say that we probably see at least one of these a year. So this is the latest of those. That particular vulnerability is one of those cases where you can see that Edge browser in IE mode be taken advantage of. There, again, if you would lock this down and make it so that you can't run in that IE compatible mode, this vulnerability would not be able to be exploited by a threat actor. So it's social engineering involved. It's getting the customer to take a few steps to get things in the right stage and then launch the file that's been specially crafted to take advantage of that. They have been getting quite ingenious with this. Usually they're doing very targeted attacks when they do that. But I think that's a good call out here by Dustin in just talking about the fact that that is continuing to be kind of a thorn in our side, that IE mode for the Edge browser. The second article gets into this, when I have conversations with organizations around when do you go down the path of zero-day response. I think this article does a really good job of giving CSO Online. So really this is geared at the CISO audience, but I think it's a good takeaway for all of us. When do we shift from that regular maintenance mode into, reactive 0-day response mode? It's good to have policies in place. It's good to have your products configured to be able to do this. Those of you who use our Ivanti Neurons patch solution, you know that we have a specific 0-day response task out of the box. Your policy is designed to let you enable this so that it's ready to go on a moment's notice. And all you have to do is add a specific patch. Once you decide you want to do it, you add that patch. Your policy is already configured, and it's going to go out and do that. And you can have it set up to do so on a daily basis to check and make sure any of the 0 days that you say need to be done as soon as possible, get done as soon as possible. I've talked to many organizations like yourselves, and a lot of them are starting to say they've got a 48-hour response time from the point where they say they need to, or they have decided to respond to a 0-day. They've got 48 hours to do that then. So having that configuration ready to go out of the box is step one. The second stage is, when do we decide to pull the trigger on that? And I think that this article does a really good job of talking about that. You've got a number of different vulnerabilities that a lot of people were talking about. This part here, the screaming from the hilltops, there was a lot of noise going around about several Azure vulnerabilities that Microsoft disclosed yesterday. In fact, there is really no reason to, waste brain power on those right now, because Microsoft already took care of them. The 4 Azure vulnerabilities were already implemented by Microsoft. They've already been resolved. So if you're doing anything, it's more of a reading up on to understand what was exposed. If there was any reason to be concerned about it, your security team might need to know so they could go do some investigation, but there isn't any immediate action needed. So in a lot of cases, this is overhype of vulnerabilities, and it's drawing our attention away from the ones that we really need to worry about. The no emergency section down here kind of talks a little bit about this as well, talking about the different vulnerabilities that are being exploited this month. We're going to talk about these in a second here. 4 out of 5 of them, the way Microsoft describes them, and the fact that there aren't any large-scale threat actor or ransomware ties or malware ties for these, the 5 vulnerabilities that were exploited this month are pretty localized in their impact. Microsoft has to disclose it as a 0-day, even if one customer is compromised. If we don't see a large-scale kind of campaign around that, there's, the fact that there's 5 0 days exploits in the OS update this month doesn't mean stop everything and go patch that immediately. We have to consider that, but we do need to weigh that consideration with other factors. If you were comparing this month's 5 CVEs to the April Patch Tuesday with one known exploited, one 0-day exploit that was resolved, I would say the April 0-day was more concerning than all 5 of these together. And the reason for that is the April vulnerability was tied to a ransomware campaign that was far-reaching. It was impacting a number of organizations. That's the one I would have said pull the trigger on. In my opinion of those two months back to back here, which one of those warranted a consideration to go into full 0-day response mode? The April update, I think, absolutely would have been under consideration. This month's update, the 5 CVEs seem to be more targeted, a little bit more complicated scenarios to exploit, and would have been limited in the overall impact. We should make sure that we get them rolled out in a timely fashion, but just, that's kind of I think this article does a good job of readjusting our mindset on how we look at these things and focusing on the right things instead of the overhyped things. So this is a good read. I think it's one that teaches a couple of really good lessons of, in the moment, what should a CISO level decision maker be thinking about. I think there's a little bit of all of us to be able to take away from an article like this. So that's one I shared just because I thought it did a really good job of answering a question that I do get regularly from people that I talk to. The next one here is broader. This is a 0-day that's actively being exploited. This is part of a larger campaign. So for those of you running Fortinet, FortiVoice systems, this is a vulnerability in their platform that is actively being targeted and is part of a larger campaign. So definitely something that your organization should be focused on getting resolved if you're running these types of devices. FortiMail, FortiNDR, FortiRecorder, and FortiCamera also are affected by this, not just FortiVoice, but I believe the attackers are only using it to target the FortiVoice installations right now. So that's your urgency. The others are important just because that same vulnerability could be exploited there, but FortiVoice is your priority for plugging, the point where attackers are currently actively attacking. So for those of you running Fortinet, just be aware of that. Last one here. This is another one that often comes up is vulnerabilities that are part of that larger exposure management bubble. This is not something that's going to be handled by your patch management solution. This is something that a business line team is going to have to respond to. SAP does have a 0-day vulnerability. It is being targeted by Chinese threat actors. So this is the type of vulnerability where we do need that ability to aggregate and understand all vulnerabilities in our environment, and we need to be able to route those over to the correct teams to get resolved. There's a number of vulnerabilities that the patch management solutions can't help with. A network security device like Fortinet, like we just talked about, most of those, you can't just push a patch down to them. Usually there is an automated script that you're going to run, but you need to be doing that with a trained expert on those devices who's going to be able to deliver that and also validate that the configuration is still intact and respond to any issues that may occur. You may need a team of people to be prepared to be able to respond to that. A friend of mine who works in the medical space, he does all of the firewall updates for their organization globally. And whenever they're doing those types of updates, he basically sets up a cot in his office at home, and he's on call for the next 24 to 48 hours as they work through rolling out those updates. You don't go and patch a vulnerability like that. You don't go and patch a vulnerability like SAP, but we do need to get better at the visibility around that and how we're routing that to the right teams to get resolved. So again, those two, the Fortinet and the SAP, more of awareness to make sure that organizations are keeping on top of those types of vulnerabilities and getting them proactively resolved. Switching gears, so if you're looking at the slides, if you've downloaded the slide deck, you're going to see that the next few slides in there are talking about the known exploited and publicly disclosed vulnerabilities. So like the next, looks like 5 slides are what I'm going to be going through in the browser tabs here. The first of those was the scripting engine memory corruption vulnerability. So this was the kind of the oddball of the bunch this month. The theme this month for the 0 days was mostly elevation of privilege. This is the one non-elevation of privilege vulnerability. Exploit has been detected. Again, does not seem like it's widespread. I could not find any major widespread kind of news coverage of a major campaign going on around this or the other 4. So they all seem to be pretty targeted in their usage. This is the one, though, that was taking advantage of Edge in Internet Explorer mode. Again, we've seen enough of these, 1 to 2 of these a year for the past several years here, even after the end of life of IE. Yes, IE is still in some of your systems. It's, embedded at a level where you have to do some finagling to be able to turn that on and get it into that mode. But if you haven't deliberately taken steps to deny its ability to be in that mode, a threat actor could convince somebody to do the right steps to put it into Internet Explorer mode to be able to take advantage of it. And there's a few that have used that tactic very well in the past couple of years to do that. It is a social engineering scenario. They would first have to prepare the target. So again, if you're not set up for that Edge and Internet Explorer mode, they would have to basically give you the instructions like, okay, you need to open this file. To do that, you need to take these 5 steps. People do it. So we can't just think, oh, because we're not in that mode, this doesn't affect us. There are steps you can do to mitigate this further. That is, if you're not using that Internet Explorer mode, there could be more that your organization may choose to do here to mitigate that threat further. So that's the warning about this one, is there may be some additional steps you can do to prevent this type of attack in general, making sure that that's not a vector that they can use or convince a user to configure for so they can take advantage of it. Microsoft DWM Core Library Elevation of Privilege Vulnerability. This one is also being exploited. The attacker in this case could gain system-level privileges if they exploit this vulnerability. A couple of things about this, and actually all 5 of these vulnerabilities this month, they're all rated important. They all have between a 7.5 or a 7.8 CVSS score. Because they have been actively targeted. A risk-adjusted score, so this term is, the term for if you're using a RBVM platform, a risk-based vulnerability management platform, to get some additional level of prioritization on top of CVSS. That risk-adjusted score is going to take into account if it's actively being exploited, how broadly it's being exploited, if it's trending amongst threat actors. So this is the type of thing that you want to understand and get a better level of visibility on this. So for those of you using the Ivanti Neurons for patch management solution, you're going to get the CVSS score in there. But in our product, you also get what we call our VRR, or vulnerability risk rating. That's a risk-adjusted score. If you look back to last month, the April vulnerability, as it launched, because it was part of a ransomware campaign that was trending globally, the CVSS was 7.8. The VRR score was 9.22. That's what a risk-adjusted score gives you. And the importance of why we need to shift that focus towards that type of risk-adjusted assessment, because there were 6 criticals this month, critical vulnerabilities that were resolved. None of those are actively being targeted. It's the 5 important vulnerabilities that are actively being exploited that we actually have to worry about. And we're blinding ourselves to that by basing things off of vendor severity and CVSS score alone. So that was a couple of notes that I just wanted to throw out there, is make sure we're looking at the right factors around these vulnerabilities. The second one, common log file system driver, another elevation of privilege vulnerability. System level privileges if they exploit this one again. Most of these are able to be exploited all the way back to Server 2008. I was actually speaking with a writer from TechTarget yesterday, and he asked me, hey, wasn't the 3-year ESU done for 2008 a while ago? And yeah, point of fact, it was done last year in January, I believe. So we're over a year past the 3-year end of life support, and it's still going. So most likely there is 1 or 2 very big organizations that are probably continuing that Server 2008 support. I would expect they probably had some type of 5-year coverage for it. So by January this next year, we may see those finally taper off, but we're still seeing them right now. Again, that's speculation, but this happened back with Windows XP as well. And there was I believe, a 5-year extension for certain branches of the military. Specifically, this would probably be a similar case of critical infrastructure or government level entities that needed that extended coverage past the 3 years. But those of you still running Server 2012, we're only into year 2 of the extended support. So we can expect to see those for a while yet as well. Most of these 0 days this month go back as far as Server 2012, or even as far back as 2008. Only one of them affected Windows 10 and later, not the older platforms. So as you're looking at these 5 0 days this month, the good news is your OS update covers all 5. It takes care of it, and you get to resolve those all in one shot. One other thing to note as we wrap this up, we've got common log file system driver, elevation of privilege vulnerability again. There were 2 variations of this. If you look at the details, One ended in 706, the other one ended in 701. The really differentiating factor between these two, other than anything else in there that was pretty much the same, was the weakness, the code weakness. So most likely these were two different parts of that driver that were able to be, exploited for this and possibly even chained together to do it. So there were two different code weaknesses that were being resolved. That's why you see two distinctly different CVEs there. They almost look identical in every other way. In fact, it took me a couple of minutes to flip back and forth and say, why are these really different? But you're really going to see the CVE ID and that code weakness are the big differences between them. If you haven't already seen this, Windows 11, Server 25. If you go over to look at the download size, you're going to see that the download this month for most of these OS updates was significantly larger than normal. The normal cumulative is usually between 400 and 500 meg. That was the security update for a few of those. If we go to the monthly roll up for, let me see, where's the Server 25 one? Here we go. Yeah. 4 gig. This is because Microsoft released 3 fairly large AI features this month in the update as well. I've already seen a thread going on patchmanagement.org of people saying, holy geez, why is the Windows 10 and the other versions all where the normal size we would see, Windows 11 and Server 2025 were huge comparatively. Those 3 AI features were rather large. They're only usable if you've got a Copilot enabled machine, but the package has all of those bits included in it. So unfortunately, we get all of that baggage, whether we're going to use it or not. So that's as you start rolling this out, you're going to see a considerable size difference than normal. I even had one response to that as well. Why don't I just use the ISO instead? Well, the ISO probably would be even larger than 2 because it's going to be the ISO image plus those new AI features. So in general, we're probably going to see spikes of these larger package sizes whenever they do a major AI redistribution. But that's the reason for it. From what happened this month is it all looks like those major AI features all rolling out. That's where the size of that is from what people are seeing as they crack open those installers and take a look. So that's kind of the details on those. Oh, there was the one last 0 day, the Windows ancillary function driver for WinSock, another elevation of privilege. In this case, the attacker would gain administrator level privileges, not full system, but an admin level is bad enough in most cases. Again, seems to be targeted attacks. I didn't see any widespread news on this. This one affected only the Windows 10 and later, not the older platforms. But moral of the story, get your OS updates rolled out this month. You take care of all 5 of the 0 days. There were 2 publicly disclosed vulnerabilities. The first one was from Microsoft Defender for Identity. It's a spoofing vulnerability. No code samples or anything were disclosed as part of this by the notes that we can see here. The code maturity was unproven, meaning there isn't a sample bit of code out there that people are playing with right now to prove out this vulnerability. So the disclosure is limited in the impact. The other note about this one is Defender already updated. So if you're running Defender in, online or connected mode, you should be taken care of. There's no download for you to install. If you are running Defender for Identity in some type of offline environment, you may have some work to do to get it updated. But that's typically pretty rare. The other vulnerability is in Visual Studio. We have a slide that usually talks about dev tools being updated. This one also was a private or a public disclosure. What we see here, no code samples or anything were shared publicly. Just the high level of the vulnerability being out there. So that is another one that your development team will probably have to do something on. Not high urgency, but just so they're aware there was a disclosure around this one. Okay, let me see. We would have gone down to So now we would be on slide 12 for those of you following in the slide deck. There are slide 11, sorry. For the Ivanti lineup of updates this month, I wanted to call out there were 2 security advisories that released yesterday. We had the regular May Patch Tuesday security advisory, which included 3 updates, which I'll talk about in a second. The other one was this one here, EPMM security update. It was broken out separately because we wanted to call this one out specifically. The other 3 just included fixes, no active exploitation here. The EPMM security update does have a confirmed exploit in the wild. So this one, if you go to the security advisory, you can get the details. It is an attack chain. There's 2 CVEs that were used in combination. We are aware of a very limited number of customers that had a confirmed incident with this issue. The reason for that is if you're following our best practices, we actually give guidance right off the bat on the use of the API here, the port level ACL functionality that you should configure to better secure this. For those customers who had that in place already, you'd already mitigated the vulnerability. So most of our customers are not exposed to this unless they weren't using that guidance. There is the options then for this update is you can patch it and take care of the vulnerability altogether. You can do the ACL mitigation and should follow those best practices because it does mitigate this type of exposure. Even if there's a vulnerability, these type of ACLs prevent any type of tampering with that. So that mitigates you further. So whether you do the patching and this mitigation or just the mitigation immediately, that is kind of the 2 things that you should be taking immediate steps for. There's also an additional tool that we created. You can call our support team to get this RPM file and be able to run that on there. That will basically lock this down to mitigate the vulnerability as well. So 3 options right out of the gate, one of which many of our EPMM customers already have in place and would have prevented you from being a target of this exploit to begin with. The RPM file that you can get that can run a change on there that'll do some immediate mitigation, and then the patch to fully plug that vulnerability. So for those of you running our Ivanti Endpoint Manager Mobile, the EPMM product on-prem, please make sure to go and take a look at this. Ensure that you've got those best practices around the API and the ACLs in place, because that's good long-term protection. There is the RPM to do that immediate mitigation, and there's the patch. So mitigation, at least, patching as soon as possible is recommended. If you are using our Ivanti Neurons for MDM product, there was a vulnerability that was resolved there. That has been resolved. The other 2, the Ivanti CSA and Neurons for ITSM on-prem, again, vulnerabilities that have been resolved there. No known exploitation or anything on any of these 3, but the 2 on-prem products do have a patch for you to install. So just be aware that those are available. All right, going over to the Linux side, we have our partnership with TuxCare. TuxCare is a vendor that focuses on Linux-specific workloads, and they do what's called live patching. So for those of you who want to try to keep a maximum amount of uptime for your Linux distributions, they are able to patch the kernel and a few other components on there without having to reboot. That live patching approach helps to keep your operational uptime intact as long as possible before you have to do any reboots. Doesn't mean that the reboot isn't necessary at some point, but you can go longer periods of time without having to reboot because you're able to live patch many of the vulnerabilities that you need to worry about there. So the first one that they kind of outlined for us this month is probably the most concerning. All Linux distributions running Erlang OTP are vulnerable to this vulnerability. So the vulnerability, it's been out for, patches have been starting to come out for a little while here. It first published, many of the vendors who were looking at this first published in late April, and had some recent updates on this. So we've talked about this on here before, but the Linux world because of the open source nature, oftentimes takes a little bit longer to mobilize, and several of these platforms may lag behind more than others. So you may see vendors who are using Linux distributions as their IoT devices. Some of them are very quick to respond on this. In fact, Cisco is a good example of this. If you go query or Google search this CVE, you will actually see a article from Cisco that was released on April 22nd. It gives a very good breakdown of all the different devices within their ecosystem that are running this, the versions that are released that resolve the issue, and give you kind of a good comprehensive breakdown of everything. With a lot of other vendors, you unfortunately have to really go digging and looking for this information. So the versions are included in the mitigation section on this slide that you want to make sure you get up to the patched version. A temporary workaround would be disabling SSH server or to prevent access via firewall rules. That's obviously going to cut off access to things or potentially reduce availability. So patching may be the more viable solution for you if it's something that you need broader access for, especially if it's customer facing. So that is the first of the Linux vulnerabilities we're talking about this month. The next one is next.js. So React-based web framework is very commonly used out there. That one is also made a little bit of news in the past, probably since late March. The first articles around this came out in the end of March, but that Next.js middleware platform has this vulnerability, and it does allow attackers to execute bypass authorization to execute code. So vulnerability that you definitely want to take a look at and make sure that you're identifying where it is in your web environments and get that resolved. The third one that they highlighted for us this month is vulnerability on Tomcat. So depending on what platforms you're running it on, wherever you're running your Tomcat, Apache Tomcat instances, this is a vulnerability that I believe this one has been actively exploited. The first articles that I saw around this were published towards the end of March. But this vulnerability has been actively targeted. There is mitigation recommendations you can do, monitoring that you can apply, deploying WAF rules, different things like that. But ultimately, patching is the ideal path to get this fully resolved in your environment. So take a look at those versions and make sure that you're getting your Apache Tomcat instances on Linux up to date. All right, wrapping up the news section here. We did have a few different development tools that released, including the Microsoft Visual Studio updates, but there were also some updates for .NET Framework and some servicing stack updates that came out for Windows 10 and Server 2012. For those of you who are dealing with Windows 10 upgrades yet, we're getting close. We've got October is rapidly approaching, so that end of support date for Windows 10 is looming out there a couple months away. If you are planning to continue on past that and you're looking to get extended support in place, you definitely want to reach out to Microsoft and get that set up. They've made it a little bit more flexible than they did for 2012. They tried to push 2012 extended support very hard towards Azure. They relaxed that a little bit here, obviously anticipating how broadly Windows 10 was still being used. And they've offered several different options for pricing and delivery of this round of ESU support. If you are using an Ivanti product, you need to make sure to get your Microsoft subscription in place. And then you can contact us, and we have the ability to subscribe to the ESU feed for our security controls, Patch for Endpoint Manager, and our Ivanti Neurons patch solutions. So if you're using one of those three products, we can definitely do that extended support for you as well. All right, Todd, I think we are ready for the bullets update.
All right, let's walk through what came out yesterday. Quite a bit of activity. First off, Chris did mention at the beginning about the Adobe patches, a lot of those in the Creative Cloud Suite. I copied some of the critical ones here at the beginning. We got 5 of them I'm going to go through. Adobe Animate came out with addressing 5 different vulnerabilities. And by the way, all of these are rated critical. So all of them have to do with, you'll see arbitrary code execution as a possibility within these applications. None of these 5 are known exploited or have any known exploits that are being attacked actively right now. So there's Adobe Animate, which addressed 5 different vulnerabilities, 4 of those rated critical, 1 important. We did see an update for those of you using Adobe Bridge, 3 vulnerabilities there, all those also related to arbitrary code execution. Generally, the Creative Cloud Suite addresses the last 2 versions, the current one and the previous one. So you'll see generally on affected products, the current version and the previous. Adobe Illustrator, a very common app that a lot of us use. 1 vulnerability there that was addressed, again, rated critical. InDesign, for those of you who are in the production side there, 3 different vulnerabilities. Again, a couple of those arbitrary code execution, 1 denial of service. And then finally, Adobe Photoshop, another very common application, 3 vulnerabilities addressed there as well. So these are the ones within the Creative Cloud Suite. There were a number of other applications that were addressed by Adobe this month, so take a look at those. I didn't include them all here. I know Dreamweaver, for example, on the production page side had some vulnerabilities that were addressed as well. Moving into what happened with Microsoft yesterday, we had our usual, of course, Windows 11 updates. A little bit of a slack off in the number of vulnerabilities addressed, 41 compared to the 84 that were addressed last month. Chris did mention the ones that were known exploited, so I do have those highlighted in red here, and we identified those. Very interesting as far as what they talked about with known issues this month. Both of the bulletins for the older versions as well as the newest ones of versions of Windows 11 said no reported issues. So that Citrix issue that have been carried forward for many months, some of the other audio issues that have been carried forward for a couple of months, they are all dropped off of their KV articles, which was kind of interesting. They also said, just a generic statement, that this update includes a lot of security fixes without any details. In the chat session and Q&A, by the way, if you have any questions from us, please put them in the Q&A session so we have people on board here to answer those for you real time. There were some around, there was an out-of-band release that dealt with some of the net logon issues that they were having with Windows 11, and that was released back in the middle of April. There was some question around whether that was included in this cumulative update. So with only the statement that security issues were fixed, we don't really know. But generally, Microsoft does roll all of their out-of-band releases into the cumulative updates for the month. And so we hope that's addressed in here as well. But I did not see anything definitive anywhere that they were included in the cumulative update, but we're going to have to assume that they were. Moving to the Windows 10 side, again, still continuing to get updates, as Chris mentioned, until the last one coming in October this year. Same number of vulnerabilities addressed, the same 5, again, that were known exploited, also identified here in red for you. As far as the Windows 10 goes, there are still some known issues. Again, they did not resolve this Citrix issue that I had talked about earlier. It was in Windows 11 as well. They didn't call it out this month, but it is still specifically called out here in Windows 10. There were a number of things that have been fixed over the last couple of months, though, so that was good. So the number of known issues all around on Windows 10 and 11 have radically gone down as far as what Microsoft's reporting. Now, what you're seeing in the field may be a little bit different. There were some questions, for example, around DHCP and some other things over in the chat session that I was answering as well, where people were having issues there. As far as updates for Office go, there were 11 vulnerabilities addressed in the Office suite this month. This is the on-premise products, as well as the Mac updates as well. It was rated critical. There were a number of critical vulnerabilities that were addressed in there, so it was rated critical this month. So you definitely want to roll out your Office updates. The online versions, the click-to-run versions, had 2 additional vulnerabilities, so 13 as total. Interesting that all of these are related to remote code execution, so very similar in nature, I think, a lot of these vulnerabilities this month. But again, rated critical, so you want to make sure you get these rolled out. We did see SharePoint Server, 4 vulnerabilities addressed there. Microsoft rated this one as important. 3 versions of SharePoint Server still covered. There's the subscription edition, the Enterprise 2016, and of course SharePoint Server 2019 as well. So if you're obviously running any one of those, you want to make sure you get these included. But again, only rated important this month. No known reported issues on this side. Chris mentioned in his intro about between the Patch Tuesdays. This has been a very busy month. We had the all the Java releases came out from Oracle. So we did see those updates, and you can see that the number of updates that we're tracking these days is radically increasing. We do have updates where we have CVE information reported by the vendors, and we include those, and I have a few slides here on that. But we have lots of security updates that come out where the vendor says, hey, we did address some security issues, maybe not calling them out specifically, not calling out CVEs, but we do flag those as security updates. And you can see there are a lot of them this month. And then we also have, of course, the non-security updates as well, where they're just performance enhancements, maybe some bug fixes, things like that. Getting into specific updates that came out, as Chris was talking about earlier on the Google Chrome side, we hadn't seen it as of yesterday, but they do release weekly. So the regular weekly updates addressing security vulnerabilities here as addressed 2, 4, and 1 over the last couple of weeks. There was a Java update on the Cisco side. Firefox, of course, the browser continuing to get updates as well as the ESR, the long-term service version. You can see addressing 11 vulnerabilities, 7 vulnerabilities, etc. Again from the Mozilla side of the house. Here we get into some of the Java updates. Again, Oracle does release Java updates and all of their product updates quarterly. They have their CPU, their critical product update, once a quarter. And this month, from a Java side, we are still seeing Java 8 supported all the way through. These are the long-term service versions, by the way. They do release interim versions as well, but these are the ones that are supported for the long term, which is the reason we track them here. We have version 8, version 11, 17, and 21. And you can see the varying number of vulnerabilities that they have released and fixed in these updates. Amazon obviously does the same. They do their version updating these. It's interesting on the reporting side. You take a look at this, there's different vulnerabilities that were reported here compared to the vulnerabilities that are reported by Amazon. So there is some kind of a disconnect here, but we've logged the ones that are written down and publicly available. So maybe take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. Also, other updates that had CVEs this month, the Horizon client had 1 vulnerability addressed, VirtualBox 3 vulnerabilities. We did see some Python updates, 5 vulnerabilities addressed there, and of course, again on the Mozilla side, Thunderbird major version as well as the ESR versions as well. So quite a few updates with CVEs between the Patch Tuesdays. On the Apple side, also a lot of updates this month. You might have noticed that on Monday, they released OS updates. So there were a number of OS updates that were recently released. Here are the numbers and the number of vulnerabilities in them. Again, these are from the Monday release. So if you weren't aware of this, you want to make sure you include these in your Patch Tuesday rollouts. We also saw kind of a dot release on Sequoia in the middle of April. But the latest update they did jump from 15.4 to 15.5, and again addressing 50 vulnerabilities there in that one. So a large update for the most recent operating system. They do support 3 versions, Sonoma and Ventura, going back 2 other years there. 33 vulnerabilities and 30 vulnerabilities addressed as well. And there was a separate update for Safari. Generally, the Sequoia updates include the Safari updates. So you'll generally see the Safari 18.5 for Ventura and Sonoma advertised separately. So you want to make sure you include that when you go through and do your updates on those operating systems. Patches with CVEs. A couple here on the Adobe side that we saw throughout the month. There was a Docker desktop version. Chrome, of course, comes out for the Apple platform, the Mac platform, I should say. It's exclusively Mac these days. Mac as well as the Windows side. So you'll see a lot of overlap between the vulnerabilities there on both sides. They're generally applicable to both operating systems. The Firefox updates, obviously in a similar fashion. You'll see the same vulnerabilities in general there. There is Microsoft Edge for the Mac device as well. So those typically come out weekly. in sync with all the other Chrome updates, of course, because it's based on Chromium, the Chromium engine these days. And then finally, there was a mid-month release on the Microsoft apps. There was, you can see all here, the 16.96, various number of vulnerabilities addressed for each one of those. But if you are running it on the Mac side, you'll make sure you pick those up if you haven't already. That came out. And of course, Thunderbird as well for the Apple side as well. So lots of vulnerabilities addressed this month, as well as lots of patches between the Patch Tuesday. So basically a very busy month, and it will continue to be so throughout the summer probably.